Trump has been fairly vocal about this with respect to, for example, European cars. European cars face a relatively low tariff coming into the US, a slightly higher tariff for US cars going to Europe. The scene is slightly complicated because light trucks, utes as we call them here, have a much higher tariff. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as simple and straightforward, and it sort of takes a bit of digging to exactly know what the consequences exactly are. And
when would all of this come into play?
So he's made the announcement to make the announcement, I think, on Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday, and this would then come into play in a couple of weeks, which is a relatively short time period for all the suppliers to prepare for that.
And the reasoning put forward, I mean, I know you touched on it there.
So the first time this came into play during Trump 1, this was based on national security grounds with aluminium and steel. This time around, we haven't really seen a rationale yet. Could be a number of different legal bases that he cites. Usually what Trump will put forth is that having tariffs in place is what makes a country on steel and aluminum. And so it's really an attempt to claw back, if you will, in his mind, production of steel and aluminum into the US, which, however, takes quite a bit of time to do. So these tariffs come into place at very short notice. Ramping up production capability in the US is a much longer-term project.
Mm-hmm. So as to the effect on Australia, what would we expect that to be?
So again, it becomes fairly complicated. A company like BlueScope sells products into the US. Those coming from here would be subject to that tariff. However, production of BlueScope materials within the US does not. And so we've seen BlueScope's stock price elevate briefly at the moment. I would suspect that will balance out over time because tariffs for products coming from Australia, but also from Canada, where BlueScope also has production, will be subject to that tariff unless there's exemptions.
So let's go to the politics of that now. And as you said, this hasn't come as a surprise. The Albanese government would have been anticipating this. What happens now to hopefully secure a better deal?
So the Trade Minister has been trying to get ahead of this, Don Farrell. The question really is, Trump would probably want to hear from his counterpart, which is really the Prime Minister. And the question is whether that access is there. And we've had that happen a few years ago with Prime Minister Turnbull, who had this famous phone call where he later on said, you have to meet strength with strength, if you will. Yeah. And the question is whether Trump is prepared to do this. In the announcement on the plane, he said there's no exemptions whatsoever this time around, and the question is whether that will change or not.
Mm-hmm. And when Malcolm Turnbull had that phone call, he was able to put forward that Australia has a trade surplus, that we have a good relationship with the US. Are those sort of arguments likely to work this time round, or what has changed in the meantime?
You were asking me to look into a crystal ball that is Donald Trump's head. It's really difficult to say. If you look at the news over the last couple of days, we might be on a good track. The general commentary in Australia has been Richard Marles' visit was successful. With respect to AUKUS. Whether that actually holds true, I'm a little more skeptical about that. And we'll just have to see how amenable Trump is to these arguments, or whether there's something that the Prime Minister can tug at his heartstrings in a different light or a different way. But that remains to be seen.
And of course, there'll be a flurry of activity, but as you say, this will likely require direct talks between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump.
Correct. I think the Trade Minister to his counterpart route at the moment is somewhat closed because there is no counterpart confirmed yet by Congress. And so it really will require a lot of heavy lifting with the ambassador in Washington and the Prime Minister really trying to apply that tariff and trying to get Trump to withdraw tariffs from Australian products.